Let's look at 11 basics. First of all functions must be in a module. Macros can possibly be in another area, but functions always have to be in a model. Let's go take a look at this briefly. So if you have your developer tab up, you can go to Visual Basic, or I hit F11 normally in order to do that. You'll notice all the sheets here. If I click on any sheet, it looks like I can program here. And to some extent, you can write macros under certain conditions that you'll use for that sheet. But normally, all your programming should be in a module. And definitely when it comes to functions, because functions only work if they're in a model. If I were to program it up in one of these other areas, you wouldn't even be able to see it or access it. So if you don't have modules here, remember you go Insert and then Module. And that will get you a module that then you can program in. Next, using comments in your code. I would suggest you use comments freely in your code. To do that, you place a single quote before the text you want to be commented out, or highlight the text that you want if it's several lines and hit Comment Block. Let's take a brief look at that. Alt F11. So if I were not going to want this function to be available or such, I would highlight it and hit the content block. But I say I don't have that content block. Well, I would come up here, right click on here and say Edit. Now you see I've got some editing tools that I can move up into that taskbar. And this is the comment block. So I would highlight the lines or code that I want to have it comment out for the time being, and hit the comment block. You'll notice it put a single quote in front of each one of those lines. If I decide I want those lines later, then I can come back here and uncomment it. And now my function is up and ready to go. Defining variables. Variables give the name of a space that's been set up in memory, in RAM if you will, for which you're going to store information. It allows you then to access that storage and retrieve the information as well. Note though, there are certain words like next, for, loop that we can't use because those are reserved words. Defining data types. You don't have to define your data types, but it's nice to do and makes the program run more speedy and efficiently. You see the following data types. Integer takes 2 bytes, that's 8 bits per byte, zeros and ones off and on, and will handle a range anywhere from negative 32,000 to positive 32,000 some odd integers. Long integers, if you need something more than 32,000, then you would want to use that. Singles and doubles allow us to handle decimal places. Doubles allow larger numbers to occur. Currency also allows decimal places, but only 4 decimal places, and is set up to work with dollars. Date, for entering date information. It also enters time. Fixed string, we can set strings for, if we would want, 50 length, and a fixed length makes it more efficient if you have a lot of strings all of the same size. 50 might work for people's names. Variable length, you begin it and it can be as long as you want. Again, up to 65,000 some odd characters. There's objects, Boolean, yes or no. Boolean takes 2 bytes in spite of being just on or off. Variant, 16 bytes. It takes more, but the nice thing is that we can handle any amount of data that we want in the process. Decimal for huge numbers. If we're counting the stores or something else, then we'd want to use a decimal. And bytes is from 0 to 255. In other words, 256 possible numbers can be used in it. By declaring variables, we mean that you set up in the program and define what integers or strings that you plan to use, and it helps for the speed. It runs faster, but also catching errors and finding problems before you run into them. And we use the dim keyword, which is for dimension, It's an old computer term. It means set up in memory somewhere, a place that will hold an integer in this case, and we'll nickname it count. That is, we'll be able to grab those 2 bytes of information or put things in there as we wish. Notice this dim x is integer, y is integer, and z is integer. Each one of them sets up room for an integer. Many students, however, make the mistake of saying dim x, y, z as integer, and they think they'll all be integers. In reality, x is a variant, y is a variant, that is, if we don't give them any designation, and z is the only integer of that group. Using constants. We can also set up areas in memory where we want them to be a constant. A constant, you would give a name, say an integer, but we can also set its value equal to 4, or a rate, or a company name as a string, and it will always have the value AIG Consulting. On strings, we said you could have fixed length. Notice when I dim the string, if I want it to be fixed length, I'll say dim my string is string times 50. That will allow 50 characters and is efficient way to do that. And normally, I will just do dim my string as string. Dates. Declaring a date, you would say dim today as date, or dim start time as date. I can also put them in as constants, and notice I use the pounds around the date or around the time when I input that information. A lot of operators that are used in VBA, very similar to what you see in Excel, plus, minus, times, divide, power of, concatenate, and so forth. But notice this last one here, mod. In Excel worksheets, mod is a function, and that's the way we've used it in the past. Here it's an operator. It would be something mod something else. It's used just like a plus or minus or multiply and divide. You can also set up arrays inside of memory. To do that, you would dim my array as 0 to 100 as an integer. Or I could do the same thing by saying dim my array 100 as integer. In either case, how many integers will allow for? Actually, it will allow for 101. In computers, by default, start counting with 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 100. And so either way, you would have 101 different locations in this array. If you want it to start with 1 instead, you could say option base 1, or I could up here say from 1 to 100. To declare a multi-dimensional array, we'd do dim my array 2, 3. That is, we want 3 rows and 4 columns. Remember, everything starts with 0. So my array 1, 2, well, that's down to row 1, so 0, 1, that's this middle row, and column 2, 0, 1, 2, we're setting to 350. Finally, remember there's a lot of built-in functions in VBA. In fact, that's primarily what we'll be using. We have the replace. You notice if it takes a cell and you say, in this case, any spaces replace with nothing. That's very much like the substitute function in worksheets, but has a different name. If you're not sure, you can find out what these functions are using VBA dot. Let's take a look at that, and I'll do Control G to bring up an immediate window, and I would say VBA dot, and you can see a lot of the different functions that are here. I saw even MIRR. A lot of those functions that are in the worksheet are also available in VBA, but not all of them, and they have other functions that the worksheet side doesn't have. You can use any worksheet function if you need to or want to by first saying worksheet function dot and then put in that function name. Here are all the functions we have available in worksheets. You always have to use worksheet function dot if you want to use them. You don't have to say VBA dot. You can just use the function directly if you're in VBA.